All right, good morning, everyone, online as well as in person, and welcome to the third and final day of the annual research conference, Urban Arc at IHS. My name is Sudeshna Mitra, and I am moderating this really interesting session that we have today, Urban Spaces and Positionalities. It's a very interesting set of papers that is sort of entering the question of how can we think about urban spaces being produced, being politicized, and being engaged with in various forms if we take as a starting point the positionalities of the various um, the people who are actually residing, the people who are sometimes marginalized. So I'm just going to very quickly sort of give you a sense of the range of papers that we are going to hear today. There's a paper that we are going to start with, which is looking at universities and unpacking the town and gown relationship that exists between the university and the city in terms of planning beyond sort of the hetero-cis normative campus territoriality and looking across both Delhi and Toronto for this question. We have another paper which is on the progressive movements to bring together informal workers who are otherwise perhaps marginalized or invisibilized in city making processes as Shillong grows from sort of a hill town to a hill city. We have another paper which is looking at sports as an arena which is shaping urbanization amidst, a larger narratives of world-class city making attempts. And this is based out of Mumbai as an example. We have another paper which is looking at how can we think about pedagogy, but beyond the university, really sort of bringing together, sort of many people who are involved in grassroots movements, etc. But what does pedagogy look like when we look at those spaces, when we look at those kinds of movements? We have a paper on the gendered performativity through the lens of the female social media influencers, and examining how we can think about urban transition if we approach it through this kind of a framework. So very exciting set of papers. And just a few housekeeping notes before we start. Everyone, I mean, we have two presenters online. One, Ruchika and Rashi, is online, and we have other presenters online. Everybody gets 12 minutes per paper, and I would request everyone to sort of hold your questions till the end of the panel. We'll take all the questions together for all the panelists at the end of the panel. Smriti here is keeping time, so if you're presenting in person, just keep an eye out towards Smriti in terms of the times that she gives you. If you're presenting online, then please keep an eye out towards your chat because you will get, sort of messages about where you are on time. Let's please keep to time so that we can have a really nice set of question and answer at the end. So with that, I want to sort of start with Chan Arunpina from York University. Their paper is called Undoing the Town and Gown, Edges in Conflict, Planning Beyond Hetero-Cis Normative Campus Territoriality in Delhi and Toronto.
Um, Thank you and good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to return to IIHS. I was part of the first urban fellowship program here in 2016-17, which was right before moving to Toronto for my PhD. I'm an urban geographer as well as a professionally trained architect and a visual artist. Today, I will be presenting our forthcoming article drawing from my doctoral dissertation critiquing the cis heteronormatively coded on and off campus student housing in India and the student dwell TO, a multi campus project documenting the steepening student housing crisis in Toronto, we pioneer a transnational heterarchical dialogue that is thinking with or alongside the campus geographies of Toronto and Delhi. In specific, we analyze four cases in conflict at the campus edges of North Campus DU and St. George Campus, University of Toronto. So, conflicts in urban planning are unavoidable due to diverse interests, values, and power dynamics among stakeholders. Various theoretical frameworks, from rational problem solving to deep critiques of power and inequality, have been developed across urban planning models to understand, manage, and resolve conflicts. However diverse, these planning models and tools remain coded in binary, demonstrating a normative dis-ease with ambiguous territorialities and therefore regulating by categorizing people and places and spaces in ways that reinforce an us versus them practices. One such edgy site of conflict we will be discussing today is the town versus gown conflict. I want to spend a little time in what the issue or what the conflict really is about. So, originating in the Anglo American context, the conceptual imposition of the term town and gown signifies a sharp territoriality to describe fully segregated lives and non intersecting life worlds rooted in the historical social rift and inherent tensions between the university students adorning the gown and the non academic host community and neighborhood residents as the town. Town and gown case studies highlight a range of conflicts over the form, function, and use of urban spaces, for example, insensitive development projects and campus expansions, cultural conflicts between academic and non academic groups, as well as potentially exploitative relationships between student as researchers and community residents as or communities as research subjects. A few scholars have critiqued how town and gown, as a binary coded optic, offers a simplified understanding of otherwise multi layered and multi scalar university city conflicts and have called to move beyond the town and gown, even bridging the university and the city through innovative collaborations. However, scholarly occupations with reconciling the town and gown conflict put a lopsided onus on the university to transform the relationship between the university and and the city without refuting the charges that universities hold asymmetrical privilege over their communities. This has limited the inquiry to does the gown help the town, but not the other way around. These tensions are further intensified with the distinct yet overlapping concepts of studentification, youthification, and gentrification. So, once again, studied first in the context of rapid internationalization of higher education in the UK, university campuses confronted increasing demands to accommodate inflated incoming of transient students. Institutional housing infrastructure almost always fail to fully meet this rapidly increasing demand, and that's what shaped the off-campus student housing market. Such a commodification of student housing led to either of the two undesired outcomes: the downgrading of the neighborhoods with unkempt party-going student lifestyles, or a positivist urban upgrading through student-oriented gentrification, which then displaced the local dubbed original residents around the university campuses. This phenomenon of student residential domination of certain neighborhoods in the campus district has since been widely come to be known as studentification. A wide range of scholarship that employs studentification as a concept often negatively portrays a homogenized student image as the new, young, and transient apprentice gentrifier responsible for the neighborhood decline, urban gentrification, social segregation, densification, and the displacement of longer term residents, including at times deprived communities. Students are also morally charged by neighborhood residents as leading carefree and promiscuous lifestyles inappropriate for children and families. Students and in extension student housing are held as the vessel of conflict between university and the neighborhood. Central to the conflict, yet transient student voices and their domestic spatialities remain largely missing within the outward looking town and gown scholarship and radical planning and policymaking initiatives. University neighborhood relations have also been critiqued for asymmetrical power geometries across the axes of gender, class, race, sub-ethnicities, and socio-spatial relationships, but not sexuality. As such, the city, the neighborhood, the university students are all as if desexed. Underscoring these at once missing dimensions of transient student voices, student domesticities, and sexuality's analytical framework, we argue for the analytical avail of considering the town and gown conflict as cis heteronormative. And parallelly, the campus edge as both spatially and temporally a multi layered liminal trans space where binary codings come undone. Through our queer and trans analytical reading of four cases of town and gown conflicts in Delhi and Toronto, we deconstruct I forgot. We deconstruct and hold the underlying assemblage of cis heteronormative constructs, a good neighbor and an ideal wife, a responsible adult, a real neighborhood, original residence, and a model family accountable for the continued absence of engaging with transient students within the urban campus planning discourses. We conclude by observing how pivotal queering and transing planning, separate from queer and trans inclusive planning, is to undoing the binary coded town and gown conflict and revisioning the ironically static figure of transient students. In undoing the town and gown binary, we work to undo various other binaries critical to our transnational study of city campuses, including but not limited to Global South and Global North, University City, student and non student residents, and transients and permanents. I do not have time to dive deep into the four cases in conflict, but here is a brief overview of our observations. The first case in conflict involves an ongoing legal case between DU and Young Builders over a proposed high-rise private residential development project ambiguously located either adjacent to or within the North Campus, raising a key question. Where exactly does the university end and the city begin? Conflict resolutions offered by the courts, private real estate developers, and the university administration itself are coded in binary, where the university is considering enclosing the campus altogether in order to resist such stately intrusions and violations. The second case in conflict, in contrast, has University of Toronto partnering up with private real estate developers to develop an off-campus high-rise private student housing, though on a university-owned land. While the neighborhood residents are entirely silent and unconcerned in the former case, neighborhood residents in the St. George campus district expressed an uproar resisting both the university's partnership with the private developers as well as the proposed student housing project. In reading both these case files, uh, we critically observe a certain wifing of the universities. That is, universities are not only feminized, but also domesticated by the masculine state and all of its constituent institutional actors, including private estate developers and local neighborhood residents. In the second parallel of cases in conflict, gendered segregated typologies of off campus student housing are studied. PGs in the or paying guest accommodations in the case of Delhi, and sorority and fraternity homes in Toronto. In the first instance, members of the Mukherjee Nagar RWAs voiced concerns over illegal PG units, increased population density due to students, suspicious identities of students, and unacceptable student behaviors, particularly women students' choice of fashion. Parallelly, in Toronto, members of four wealthy neighborhood resident associations filed formal complaints to the city council expressing concerns about noise, safety, and the transient nature of student lifestyle, seeking regularization of sorority and fraternity homes. Resident families' letters and responses in both these cases reveal a certain entitlement to the neighborhood and how they patronize and pit student lifestyles against senior members and familial lifestyles along the axis of age, class, race, sub ethnicity, religion, and this pitting is often informed by cis heteronormative moral constructs of, as I was saying, that assemblage of a real neighborhood, a responsible adult, a good versus undesirable neighbor, a real family hinged on coupledom and compulsory cohabitation, and original residence and authentic belonging. I'll wrap up with these couple of takeaways and conclusions. We critically counter the concept of studentification with cis heteronormative familification as a form of heteroactivism that persists subtly in both urban national contexts, challenging the sexually regressive progressive binary. Drawing from A, queer and trans ecologies, we call to consider campus edges as liminal trans uh, spatialities where binary codings come undone. Queer and trans temporalities, we show how campus edges in conflict are not just socio-spatial but also temporal in nature, drawing from a normative line between transience and permanence, youth and adulthood, student and non student domestic rhythms. And C, queer belonging and intimacies, we deconstruct and hold the cis heteronormative assemblage accountable for both wifing of universities and patronizing transient student perspectives. Ultimately, we observe the value and call for queering and transing planning to undo the town and gown binary to which the voices and lived experiences of transient university students are indispensable. Thank you so much for your patience and listening.
Thanks so much, Anne, for starting us off with so many lovely ideas. Like the questions are all brimming, but like I said, that we will, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box, which is online. And if in-person questions, just hold it and we will come back to it at the end of the sessions. With that, I move to Rahul Saikia, who's from the Delhi School of Economics, and his paper, which is called Negotiating Equitable Transitions in 21st Century Shillong, Hawkers and the Hill City. Rahul, over to you.
Yes, good morning to everyone. Um, I'm a geographer, and my research interests lie at the intersections of policy, placemaking, and urban restructuring. For today's presentation, I will be looking at Shillong's transformation from a hill station to a hill city from the perspective of the city's hawkers as they try to negotiate their right to the changing city. Now, just for introductory purposes, I added this sketch which I had made of the city's outskirts. This area would have been paddy field roughly 30 to 40 years ago, and it has since turned into an area of urban sprawl. Interestingly, the area is also home to a large number of the city's hawkers. And although the hawkers might reside in these outskirts, and while the hawkers might reside on the outskirts, it is in the city's center where they earn their livelihood and where they have been resisting eviction through a process of unionization and calling for the implementation of a central law that regulates their livelihoods. Now, to understand this process better, I conducted interviews with activists, hawkers, and citizens. For a more formal introduction, we can just have a quick run through of Shillong in terms of its spatio-historical evolution. It was established in 1864 as a hill station, and over time it emerged as a highly cosmopolitan town. It was the capital of colonial Assam, then post-colonial Assam, and then Meghalaya in the present time. Uh, Through these various avatars, the city has been the site of multiple political, ethno-nationalist, and economic restructurings. But in terms of demographics, what we see is that from the early 20th century, when it was a small town with just 8,000 residents, it has grown to a large city with 350,000 residents at last count. And what's significant here is that this population increase has not always been matched by improvements in infrastructure and employment opportunities. Now, while this is true for many cities, the case is especially acute in the case of Shillong because of the high levels of multidimensional poverty and rural landlessness. Now, this in turn has spurred informal employment and enterprises, i.e., hawking, in the city of Shillong. And this has been opposed by administrators and others who tend to have more sanitized visions of the hill station. Now, it is in this context that it is important to look at the progressive movement called Tma Urangli Juki, henceforth referred to as TUR, the acronym, which has been working to organize informal and contractual workers in the city, right? Especially organizing a hawkers union with a rather long name, the Meghalaya Greater Shillong Progressive Hawkers Union, henceforth referred to as the union. Now, based on my interviews, I ascertained that there were roughly about 2,500 hawkers in the city, though other estimates put it at much higher. Around 1,500 are union members. The rest still negotiate directly with the municipal and the traditional urban local bodies, the SHNONgs. Some are small traders, other are micro manufacturers. Some are veranda hawkers who pay a rent directly to the shops outside which they sit. Others are street hawkers. Some are agents who actually pay a small amount to the retailers who they work for. So we see that the hawkers have different levels of engagement to the formal marketplace as observed in cities elsewhere. Now, I wanted to look at, from my interviews rather, it emerged that hawking emerges as a safety net, informal safety net for those who have fallen through the cracks, as it were, of the urban economy. For instance, I spoke to a chaiwala who said that he once had a shop in a commercial establishment, but the owner of that establishment put up a building in its place, which leased out to a company. And so he lost his shop in the process. And this points to the lack of affordable commercial property, which is a big issue in Shillong, especially in terms of the latest round of urban restructuring in the city. Again, I spoke to a food vendor, and this person said that he had left his job in a restaurant after the employer refused to raise wages. Again, another case of someone trying to negotiate the downside of the urban economy through hawking. A clothes seller that I spoke to, he turned out to be an ex-tourist taxi driver who was earning well till he was diagnosed with eye condition. So he had to stop driving and then resort to selling clothes on the foot side. So in all these cases, what we see is that hawking provides a minimal informal safety net for hawkers, for people in the city. This, however, is not the way in which the administration tends to see hawkers, as they see it as something against the law. This again is observed in other cities across the country. But in the case of Shillong, it's interesting because in a state that is not necessarily known for high levels of scrutiny and clamping down on other illegalities, hawkers emerge as an easy target. Now, it is in this context that I decided to look at TOR and the Hawkers Union, because they have been calling for hawking to be seen as a legitimate source of livelihood, as defined so under central law. Now, this central law requires, or rather allows for 2% of a city's population to be engaged in hawking, and for registration of hawkers, and for the constitution of a town vending committee with 40% hawkers representation. Now, in the case of Shillong, a large part of the tussle and a large part of what TUR has been fighting for has been for the implementation of a central law over a state law which has none of these protective provisions. For an insider's account of this process, one can look at Gertrude Lamare's essay in Zuban's Centerpiece in 2017. Now, for my interviews, I managed to ascertain that the progressive movement known as TUR initially came together when a group of activists were campaigning for a state lokayukta in Meghalaya. And this brought together like a handful of left-wing activists as well as community activists. Another activist pointed out how social media, and he pointed out to the Facebook algorithm, he said that that played an important role in helping him identify other individuals with progressive politics. Once this movement was formed, the hawkers issue came to their notice when they saw that a lot of hawkers were being removed by the municipality and their wares were being confiscated. After raising the issue in a meeting, they started distributing pamphlets to the hawkers, trying to organize them. One activist said that what particularly worked was an article in the newspaper that called on them to unionize, expressing support. And to their surprise, a large number of hawkers did actually respond to this call. Now, when I asked them how they managed to bring forth this kind of support, they said that see, it was existentialist threat to the livelihood of the hawkers, and that is why it sort of struck a chord with them. Initially, the members of those said that they didn't really know how to move ahead until one of them discovered or came across the central law, wherein it was said that you cannot just remove hawkers, but you have to register and then regulate hawkers. Now, armed with this law, literally, because they would go up to police and other authorities who were trying to remove these hawkers with a copy of the law in their hands, which they had printed out. They proceeded to unionize the hawkers and then take the issue to court. Now, after several years, they first got a stay order, and now the court has said that the state has to implement the central law. Um, for their part, the hawkers have also praised this movement because of its transparency. They said that whatever small contribution they make, which is 10 rupees a month, goes to a central fund of the hawkers, which is on which they receive updates on in terms of how this fund is being spent for the case that is being fought in court. The other laudable aspect of the movement is that it's its non-sectarian ethos. Union members have tried hard to ensure that there are no communal divisions within the movement. Now, if we were to look at it from a theoretical perspective, the hawkers movement emerges as a case of urban commoning. We know the definition in terms of aspects of the city, public space, public services, which should be controlled by the people in an equitable manner. Now, as Harvey points out, the commons are not a de facto given, but they are a site of working class struggles and alliances towards reasserting the rights to the city. And one aspect of this is touched upon by one of the members of Tarun Bhatia, who speaks about how the urban commons would likely be an oxymoron unless and until people start fighting for them. A link is included here. The other aspect of the commons is how they are strengthened by bringing together diverse stakeholders. And so, in this case, if we look at the central law itself, is a good example of street vendors working alongside with unions and then pushing it forward to a progressive judiciary and to put forth pro people legislation. Having looked at the movement and looked at its positive points, we also we noticed in the case of Shillong that there is a great deal of polarization over the hawkers issue. Now, those who support the hawkers tend to see hawkers as marginalized and as a marginalized group whose needs are being pushed away into the margins of the city. However, those against hawking tend to point out that there are far too many hawkers on the scene, especially in recent years, emboldened as they are through union activities. Now, these polarized opinions keep going back and forth in the local Shillong Times, the largest English daily in the city. But in many of these cases, what we do see is despite this polarization, there is some agreement and some consensus that is reached in the end of these debates. Even shopkeepers who say that they are inconvenienced by hawkers nonetheless say that the hawkers should not be removed, but nonetheless regulated. And this is interesting because this is the exact same thing which many of the members of Toad themselves say that if you want regulation, then there are provisions for it in the central law. Their worry is that the state is not implementing it, perhaps because they would once again like a more sanitized version or vision of the city. Right? So with that, I end my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rahul. That's a really nicely, concisely spoken presentation, and there are just so many layers to what you spoke about. Again, a whole range of questions, I'm sure, but we will take them at the end. With that, I will move to Balbir Singh Olak, who is joining us from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, and his work is on sports as an arena for understanding urbanization in the Mumbai region during the late 20th and early 21st century. So, Balbir, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Firstly, I hope I'm audible and clear to everyone. This is actually great to have, an opportunity to speak about sports in such a diverse panel, which particularly deals with urban space and so many meanings attached to uh, to it, particularly with the role people play in shaping their own sort of lives. I mean, and to that end, I wanted to particularly bring together the story about how we largely see, for instance, one particular sport here. This is largely stemming from my own doctoral work, which looks at kabaddi and football in Mumbai during the 20th century and early 21st century. I want to particularly focus this presentation on kabaddi, more particularly in the period of industrialization and in Mumbai, which started with the initial developments of mills and even throughout I mean from 1856 when the first mill was set up and subsequently during different phases, and what exactly did industrialization sort of bring to this particular culture, right? And how did, I mean, kabaddi as one of the most relevant, important, and crucial pastimes and traditions in the rural space. Kind of found its home in Mumbai amidst, I mean, urban change, right? And we usually, I mean, associate urban change with a lot of, I mean, urbanization with a lot of changes. And in that sense, what did, I mean, it do to Kabaddi per se when it moved from a rural to an urban game is something that I wanted to speak about. And what kind of, I mean, position that the sport itself took within the larger, I mean, circuits of uh, popular cultures, countercultures, I mean, more colonial cultures, which were sort of present during that period. So what we usually find is there's a lot of commercialization of, I mean, very clear distinctions between private and public space, for instance, which stem as a result as, I mean, cities industrialize, and then there's dedicated notions of free time and work time, for example. But what we see largely in the case of kabaddi is that industrialization and organization of kabaddi into a sport was largely simultaneous in nature, and uh, in a way were happening together rather than one sort of shaping very commercialized notions of the game. And therefore, I mean, leisure itself did not, I mean, emerge as a separate market, or even any sort of commercialization didn't exist for kabaddi for a very long time. I mean, despite the strong presence of, I mean, an industrial, I mean, force behind like a lot of migration into the city, Kabaddi continued to have its space in the city without necessarily developing a leisure market for itself or commercializing to a very great extent. It's only, I mean, much later in the 21st century now that we find any form of commercialization happening, and that's still at a very nascent stage. Uh, Also, for more than a century, industrialization and service economies that bought Mumbai did not transform the sport into anything more than something that people held very near and dear, and more importantly, something that wage laborers continued to produce uh, with their own bare, I mean, hands and time, right? And this production of their own social life that they consume has allowed them to maintain, manage, take control of space, and continue to make kabaddi their home. Uh, I mean, continue to make kabaddi their home despite, I mean, changes in migration, decline in industrial output, or I mean, generally with the industries going away as well, and also with, I mean, new service economies coming in. One of the most important things that I could find as well is that a lot of the consumption of kabaddi in social life is driven by patronage. This is something that stems from both, I mean, religious undertones. Also, more particularly, this has to do with how the sport has been able to organize itself around regular electoral politics instead of like capitalist enterprises which largely dominate leisure markets or any forms of commercialization attempts. I just wanted to kind of point out like this entire period and the kind of people that came during, I mean, the industrialization phase from the 1850s up until independence and in the subsequent decades, and what we during the mill period. Of course, like this is not to say at all that kabaddi isn't present in the suburban side of the city and it's only located in mill areas, and something that I will come to in a minute. uh, this is just to say, this is just to point out about a specific case or a site or an urban space which was the millland area, which is called Girangao, right? How this kind of population sort of shaped and continues to kind of transform, and maintain like urban space through this kind of rural urban continuity, which is Kabaddi, right? Uh, this is just one example. I don't know how much, like, this is just to show what we find essentially over time is that this is some sort of a work that I did to understand which clubs were located where in the city 40 years apart. So I had clubs which are located in today where they are and where they were located in the early 90s. Uh, and what we see is there's hardly any difference. So, we continue to see locations which dominated. Uh, in the late 20th century, continue to dominate and also continue to grow. More importantly, in terms of kabaddi clubs, uh, in these particular locations themselves, which which brings us to the point that how sort of this kind of urbanization that we witnessed in Mumbai brought kabaddi as a home, brought kabaddi to its home in a big city as it was in the village, and democracy and elections have a lot to do with it. Uh, Along with industrialization, of course, which brought in all of these people. So sports therefore provides like an entry point into the positive sort of continuities that are present in the cities, whether it's from rural to urban, colonial to post-colonial, and so on. Therefore, kabaddi kind of emerges as this case, right, where from India as a culture that flourished because particular people who could eventually set up institutions, rules, regulations, and could organize associations were alert to the new opportunities that big towns were bringing. And this is particularly relevant as we now find sports and particularly find sports as, kind of central to planning and looking at recreational spaces, public spaces so critically today, particularly in the 21st century. um, Also, colonial cultures have usually been seen as cricket and football, right? So this kabaddi necessarily then something of a counter culture because it's rooted to the ground. But what exactly is it countering, correct? Because all of these sports have continued to exist and flourish in the city, so nobody is growing at the cost of each other. Um, Similarly, like what my current work kind of presents, therefore, is like placing kabaddi in this global city, and what kind of, drawings can we like look at about how people have been able to basically be able to work together and kind of figure out a way to continue to build on previous generations. Of course, like there's, at the very micro level, there's, the role of mandals, which are largely religious oriented. Also, language plays a very critical role in all of this, right? But I largely wanted to point out that it has been able to continue to find a home in Mumbai through patronage and politics, particularly as we see a more consolidation of local government. From the 90s onwards, where regular elections also meant a regular, money being flown into the game, particularly because Kabaddi was able to draw a lot of crowds. My analysis also points out like how whenever you will have like the number of tournaments that would be organized during a particular year would very neatly correspond to election years as well. So in election years, the number of tournaments would increase. And essentially, while that is useful for the politics, which allows them to kind of get access to crowds and all of that, it's at the same time it's shaping up an economy and developing a kind of patronage that helps, I mean, the sport continue to be at home. What this particularly therefore points out, right, like that mills have always been I mean, even in literature, seen as continuities between rural and urban, the city and the city experience. Therefore, reflecting on this heterogeneity in the city, reflecting on kabaddi as this heterogeneity in the city becomes crucial. Just how like wage laborers, just by being there, are continuing to produce their own culture, that they realize and realizing this heterotopia in Mumbai. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Balbir. You have kept to time, and in fact, I think there's still 2 minutes left. So I'm like really happy to see everybody kind of keeping to that. No, but it's also very interesting to sort of hear the details of what you're saying in terms of like gives another picture beyond the larger sort of capitalist or real estate driven narratives of Mumbai. So it's we'll get into that a little bit more in the question answer session. But now I want to go to Abhiruchi Ranjan, who's joining us from Christ. And her paper is on urban transitioners rather than urban transitions and the emergence of the extraordinary modern woman in India's social media landscapes. Abhiruchi, over to you.
Thank you, Sudeshna. Um, a very good morning to all present. Thank you for the opportunity of sharing somewhat of an ongoing area of interest and research. So, my primary interest is in gender, various aspects of gender studies. And this particular topic is about how do we look at the idea of the urban from the in the context of the digital space. So, in terms of spacing the urban, how is the digital space creating sort of urban through the idea of transition? Now, when we look at the urban in terms of the class caste milieu, we are able to position it in a certain way, in spatially, geographically. But in terms of the digital space, I felt that there are two lenses that I use. One is the gendered lens, in the sense of what it takes for women to perform a certain modality of being urban and modern, how it is distinct from for in the gendered sense. So that was a specific aspect of transition that I wanted to look at. And the other is what is interesting about the digital space in terms of the neoliberal aspect of self optimization, as Rosalind Gill writes about. So that was very interesting for me in terms of what are the opportunities the neoliberal space provides for women who are content social media content creators, and who are transitioning. So there is a sense of the the a space of where you can it's in transition. So it does offer you the possibility of very drastic change, like we can see the in the case of Nancy Tyagi, who became very popular for her couture, like she's a designer, and her fashion sense in at Cannes in 2024 recently. So she kind of got discovered through her appearance at Cannes, and obviously nobody sort of gave her that kind of space in the dominant media platforms. But she emerged because of this dress that she designed. She became a very viral figure in the YouTube space. So now she has over 1 million followers on her channel. So I have taken the so theoretically, I have taken the two theories of gendered self-optimization and gender performativity. Gender performativity, obviously, of course, being the Butlerian framework, in which I'm not suggesting that there there is. n- uh, that the performative aspect for me is also the embodied aspect. So I'm not trying to suggest that they are performing or enacting it, but in the sense of how it embodies a certain kind of class. And self optimization in the sense of never really completely achieving the sense of the modern. And this is from the neoliberal perspective, that how sort of in terms of speaking styles, or how you the kind of clothes you wear, or even the kind of pauses you take while speaking, or now for example, what they call the duck face is also having various kinds of variations on various social media platforms. So there's a fish face, there is a duck face, there is different variations of how to showcase yourself in front of the camera to achieve the kind of urban, upwards, socially mobile image. So these are the how I'm approaching this research. And basically what I'm looking at are certain discursive frames. So this is the Irving Goffman's framing analysis. And because there is too much material in any kind of YouTube video, and I have focused on four uh, female social media influencers who typically fit this transition framework of being from the small city to a cosmopolitan city. So, ideally, Mumbai or Delhi. So, Dolly Singh, Nancy Tyagi, Manisha Rani, and Komal Pandey. These are the people I have whose content I have looked at. And basically, what I found was broadly that their personal style, the aesthetic styles, the which includes dietary habits also. So, a certain kind of in trend dietary habits like almond milk, how what are the kinds of narratives associated with such kind of dietary habits, and including them and showcasing them in their content, what kind of sort of mobility does it provide to that influencer, their daily routine, their social network, who all they know within their social media, the that network of influencers, who all do are they connected with, um, and the social status. So a lot of their content is also about buying a home in Mumbai. So it's very aspirational. It's something that relates with the sort of aspiration, the audiences who are also liking this content because of this element of being aspirational and upwardly mobile. So this is also in line with the idea of the subjecthood created by the neoliberal framework, where uh, the subject is hard working and sort of very diligent, persevering. So this kind of fits in that, the social status, showing whether you have a balcony, sea facing house, and so showing that journey of through like personal vlogs. So these are all the things that are part of what I was looking at. And I found that there were three broad registers in which these frames fit: the linguistic register, the visual register, and the affective register. And within this, I am yet to fully, I would say, have completed the frame analysis. But in so far, these are the various points I was able to kind of look at. So within the linguistic register, the paralinguistic or discourse markers, I found that it was very interesting that how something like the tongue clicking can be um, um, can well, can sort of fill in for a phrase in the English language that may not be available to that person's vocabulary. So instead of that being the marker of your social class, how certain paralinguistic features can be a part of that person's, social class. So whether it is, tapping the nails or clicking the tongue or taking a long pause, how those can be like stylistic elements or paralinguistic features of the speech. Then stylization. So, for example, Dolly Singh does this bit about dressing up as Raju ki mummy. And so this is part of the her self-deprecatory humor, where she takes a middle class character and uh, enacts it and makes fun of it, and in a way then claiming a upper class sort of social location through that. So as she would exaggerate certain pronunciations, certain local pronunciations of an English word, and create the other of that in her self. So and Komal Pandey, I found that in a lot of her videos, she there's an exaggerated use of the term "I love." So it's kind of a it's a way of not really putting too much of meaning on the term "I love," but just using it as a phrase to talk about almost anything. So I found that very interesting. I thought it's a kind of stylized element in her speech. Then code switching, the use of English accented pronunciations for Hindi words, like Guruji. So, that accented way of pronouncing it, or, playful mixing of words. Um, um, I will try to summarize it very quickly. The visual register, again, certain spatial aesthetics. For example, a lot of these influencers spoke about their home decor and how they prefer, they were bohemian elements, and wherever they traveled, they made a conscious effort to include that in their spatial surroundings. So the change to from loud colors to neutral tones in their homes, that was like very important to them. While in all of those content where they're talking about buying a home, or buying their family a new home, the decor of the home was very important. So what was the visual registers, what were the colors they were using as a backdrop for their video. Curated visual frames, very very carefully curated visual frames. So what is the end, uh, uh, what is the look you are trying to achieve. And iconography, how you use props, lighting, symbols, even the placing of something so simple as a coffee mug, how you eat on video, all of these marking sort of where you're socially placed. And very lastly, the various affective registers. So what works for Manisha Rani is that she showcases her rootedness, her bond with her traditional values. So in a way, she's portraying cultural authenticity, and at the same time, in her other content, she also expresses like sort of an individuality. And I relate that to, again, the idea of the self optimization. Even though there is a space of like the global vernacular space where you can speak in a certain way without knowing proper grammatical English, and also you have access to a certain sort of self expression, but I also place it in the framework of like this being also a disciplinary mechanism, and also ways in which like an individual subject is expected to self optimize themselves. So due to the positive time, I'd like to conclude here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Abhiruchi. That is a very fascinating presentation. We have one more paper, and sustaining sites of learning beyond the university, pedagogical reflections from IHS's inclusive housing program. We have two speakers for this, Rashi Mehra and Ruchika Lal. Ruchika Lal is here in person, Rashi is online. Both of them are from IHS. This is a very interesting presentation. I apologize, folks, but over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, and it's really lovely to be able to share this work from IHS at such an interesting panel. So today, Rashi and I, we would like to share reflections from IHS's Inclusive Housing Program, which is a training program that we both anchor here at IHS. And we are interested in thinking about, the role of the university, and for the university to have a public role, what does that entail? And we argue that that requires a sort of a transition of seeing the community from a site of study to recognizing the community as a site of knowledge production. And so this training program is really designed for community practitioners, researchers, activists who are at the forefront of several of the urban challenges that we have been, discussing through the last couple of days. They're often first responders at times of crisis, during evictions, floods. They mobilize, to access basic services, engage with different stakeholders, and engage propositionally. They work through different modes of practice and activism, such as organizing, protest, research, and advocacy. And the program is really tailored to suit, it's designed for their needs, their learning needs, and their, their timeline, their availability. So it's structured as part-time weekend programs. It's conducted across cities outside of this campus, and it unsettles some of the assumptions of what a conventional classroom might look like in terms of what is taught, how it's taught, who is in the room. Um, and so, very quickly, just to reiterate that, they're learners, they're residents of bastis, informal settlements, resettlement colonies, unauthorized colonies, who are very much at the forefront of working on questions of housing and allied rights. Several have, faced evictions themselves. They understand deeply housing inequalities, and the various inequalities that our cities have. So this program has evolved over a decade. In 2015, some of its initial pedagogical engagements started with housing rights activists actually here in Bangalore, and several members of the faculty here were part of that as well. And that soon after led to engagements outside in Indore and Ranchi with, networks that they were connected to. Around the same time, the Fellows of Practice program started at IHS, which brought in housing rights activists as faculty within our teaching programs, which occurs within the building, as well as to sort of input into research agendas institutionally. And the Fellows of Practice and these housing rights activists have been crucial to defining learning agendas within this program, and to identify curricula required and future trainings. From 2019 to 2022, we had an opportunity to build on these engagements and conduct cross-city co-learning workshops across Indore, Delhi, Bangalore, Ranchi. And we were able to, with the Fellows of Practice, design new curricula, new pedagogies. And today in 2025, in the last couple of years, we've been able to structure this a little bit more. And so now what we have is a 9-month program with the same set of 20-25 participants. So we're able to engage with the same set of people for much longer, retaining our part-time model, and we'll speak more about that a little going forward. And what we really like to do is, at this moment of time, also reflect on, how can differential capacities be bridged, and what does that entail in terms of program design and structures. We've had 23 to 24. We've had a cohort from Delhi, and we're currently engaged in Indore, and Rashi will talk about this a bit. But before we get to that, a really quick overview of some of the principles in terms of curricula, classrooms, and co-learning. So in terms of curricula, it's co-designed with housing rights activists, and the learning agenda really is informed by needs of urban social movements at the city and state level networks. The curricula is structured for a mix of technical skills, theory, and leadership. And the aim is really for this to be actionable. So, how do participants pick up skills and vocabularies, and how can they wield it in their own practice? How is theory used? How can participants make sense of theory with their own experiences, and how can that open pathways of practice forward? How can we, and learning by doing is really important. The classrooms are weekend based and residential. So we have 9 months. We meet every 1.5 months in person, and then in the interim time there is homework, there's field work, there's time for participants to sort of deepen their reflections and their engagement, as well as deal with real life. And then there's peer-to-peer learning is really important. Everyone is learning from each other, and we offer kinds of research support in terms of online staying in touch online for mentorship, as well as travel allowances for folks to actually come in and participate in the class and on field. Co-learning is really important. Everybody is a learner in the class, and faculty come in from academic. We have academic faculty coming in from IHS, but we also have community-based activists. And what is important is for us, as we're thinking through this, is that what we're aiming for is not just a transfer of skills, but for folks to be able to own the research and its practice pathways forward. So how can we think about continuing a chain of learning beyond the class, and how could this nurture a second line of leadership and growth? Rashid, over to you.
Thank you, Ruchika. In our program, so like Ruchika mentioned, we started the program in 2023 in Delhi, and Delhi, the like Ruchika already mentioned, that our students are drawn from bastis and informal settlements and have an interest in working on housing rights. We called for to enter the program, to be accepted into the program. We used a method of nomination. So we reached out to networks within the city of unions, community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations, other city level networks that exist in Delhi, and said, if you could give in a nomination of a fellow who could benefit, a student who could benefit from a program like this, who would have the time to be able to engage part time over a long period of time with us. And that is how we got 18 students in our first cohort. The curriculum, as you can see, we had 6 sessions over 9 months. So, questions of framing housing justice. So, really looking at theoretical concepts in the classroom, and looking at housing justice, looking at larger issues, not just within Delhi, but within India, global south cities, crisis response to evictions. So, again, like Ruchika mentioned, a lot of the students themselves had faced evictions and came with that experience, and also the networks that the nominations came from, and in that kind of co-designing the curriculum elements of our program, crisis response to eviction. So what to do before an eviction, what to do during an eviction, what to do post an eviction. Skills like this were shared. We looked at media and advocacy for the work that they're doing, to strengthen that, to a lot of social media training, a lot of media lab training. We looked at community-based problem solving. So again, connecting the classroom to the field. So going back into various communities. So sometimes not the communities that the students are from, but newer ones, to sort of see and understand how community-based problem solving, what can it look like? What are the skills required? We had skill labs for our students. So they learned GIS, so they learned mapping. And there is, Ruchika, if you could go up, we'll show you from our curriculum. So again, this is a piece of writing that was done, a piece of work on the slum map in Delhi and how much land is under bastis in Delhi. So using that, translating a lot of those reports, which were traditionally that have been in English, and sort of going back there, translating them into for the needs, the language needs of our students, and looking at how to file public interest litigations, how do you file right to information reports, and how do you sort of operationalize the practice, strengthen the practice that you're doing, but also look at producing writing work. So if you see on the right of the screen, one of our fellows, Arvind, is has written a piece on Korigaon, which was a site that was demolished in Delhi. And so I'm just going to move forward due to paucity of time. The second cohort that we are currently, an ongoing cohort of students we have is in Indore. We hold the classes in Indore, but the students are also from Bhopal and Sagar. So we went into a tier 2, tier 3 city. Over here, the format was different. Again, the needs, of tier 2, tier 3 cities, just sort of keeping that in mind, keeping the location, the geography of Madhya Pradesh in mind. And also that this cohort is anchored by Anand Lakhan, one of our fellows of practice. And and all the students are drawn from the Madhya Pradesh Navnirman Manch. So they're already in a network, already in a social movement talking about housing justice in Madhya Pradesh. Again, a broad sense of the modules that we are doing, which is planning and tenure. So if you see that the students are sitting with, the land use map of Indore, and they're sort of studying where the communities are placed. So is it on residential land? Is it not on residential land? What do the colors of the map mean? We had GIS skill labs, and that's the photo on the right, where a similar map of bastis in Indore is right now being created. They've covered 300 bastis, and and a complete map just like the one that is there in Delhi is going to be created. We had a legal skill lab recently, just a few, I think last week, Ruchika was there, and trainings there again on legal skills. And finally, I think this is something that we do in Delhi as well, and we are going to do in our last workshop in Indore as well, which is sustaining the life as an activist. So really looking at what are the kind of solidarities that this network can build. Like Ruchika said, reiterating that a second line of leadership that needs to be built in these cities, how can they sort of sustain the work that they're doing, which is challenging, of course. And finally, like really our analysis now after yes, just if I could have 30 seconds, please, which is just really transitions in the space of the university. So really returning to what is the idea of the public role of the university by diversifying classrooms and faculty and learners, inclusivity in knowledge production from and for the communities themselves. So not looking at communities just as sites of study, but as legitimate sites of knowledge productions in themselves, and reimagining research outputs in diverse formats and languages such that it's owned by communities themselves and is actionable for their priorities. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ruchika and Rashi. That was very interesting. I'm sure. Again, we'll now dive into the questions. I'll use the prerogative of me as the moderator to actually start us all off with the question to each one of you, and then I'll open up the floor to each one of you. So, Chan, I'll start with you. Um, in your presentation, there was this sense that there is, it's almost like this onion that we really need to unpack. There are these sort of larger forces, which, again, transcends across a lot of kind of different studies. We talk about the city in terms of its real estate forces, and like inscribed in there often tacitly is the patriarchy that kind of comes with those kinds of forces that shape it. And now you're sort of, your presentation opened up these other layers of the university, which is often seen as a seat of power within sort of that town and gown kind of framing. And yet, you provoked us by sort of saying there's the wifing of the university. And then nested within that, or, I don't know if there is kind of a hierarchical relationship, but then talking about the socialities which are both regressive and progressive, which are then also sort of ordering or wanting to order the student lives in the way that they're interacting with the city. I wanted to hear, like if this is, in some ways that we can start to unpack that there are all these layers that are working with and across each other. I just want to hear a little bit more on this idea of heteroactivism that you talked about. That on one sense, we can think about it at a scale, at one scale. But when we think about it across scales, when we have these different layers operating, can you speak a little bit more about that?
So it's such an interesting question because I love the allegory that you drew with onion as well, because I'll sideline a little bit over here where so in my dissertation where I do the case study of Delhi University in specific, I kind of juxtapose these formal legal geographies of how a campus edge is perceived with the psychogeographies of queer and trans students. And so they draw their mental maps. And when we compare that, we see legal geographies and these formal conceptions of their very rigid and two-dimensional view of a border line that you're either in or you're on or off campus, in or out campus, or it's homogeneous. The entire campus edge is a singular entity, and as against that, we see like the mental maps of students did draw like organic symbolisms in all of their mental maps. And so in there we see the campus edge as porous, multi-layered, heterogeneous, and so it's not a single entity, and there are these four facets which have each different context on its own. One, I wanted to kind of bring it's really interesting to kind of see that. And then heteroactivism, to come to that, it's a term that Catherine Nash and Kath Brown have developed in their 2020 book. And it's a very interesting concept where they're looking at, largely, as you said, at the scale of neighborhood, where they're looking at the ways in which in sexually progressive, quote unquote, urban national context, how at the scale of neighborhood there are these micro forms of heteroactivism, to kind of, where it would be in the form of parks and public spaces and all of that, where they're kind of monitoring and surveilling any forms of non-heteronormative or non-cisnormative forms of expression and just being, right? And so I take it, of course, and so studentification, when we are thinking about it, is largely looking at, and gentrification is largely looking at the ways in which students are become these gentrifiers and are displacing the original residents. And in this entire narrative of gentrification and studentification, including the town and gown conflict, we're not really talking about sexuality. So like, who are these people who are getting displaced, for instance, in the gentrification? And invariably these are heteronormative, monogamous, marital family homes. And then when we do bring in the aspect of sexuality, then that is where we're looking at that students, and of course queer and trans specific, like there's intensified layer to queer and trans students. But just to look at students, no matter what identity, are treated as already displaced, like they're already displaced when they leave home, which there is no more capacity for them to be displaced, kind of thing. And so there, I think it's interesting at the level of student and institution that we can think of heteroactivism. And then of course, yes, this spill over and magnification and projection of this heteronormative family home beyond the scale of the domestic, and goes on to the scale of all these student specialities, including the town and gown edge, or the campus edge, kind of thing. I'll take a pause there because I've flown, I think, in multiple directions, but I hope that
Yeah.
respond.
No. That's a. Thanks for that. I just want to open up the floor and take a round of questions for Chan.
Thanks, Dan. Just that was really, really nice. Just a thought to unpack one thing. I find what you say really compelling, right? About sexualizing the gentrification debate. But I just want to hear you think through the question of asymmetrical economic power. still for a second, right? Because one core of, particularly not so much in the India, I'm struck by the fact that in the Delhi University context, landlords are often richer than students. But in a lot of contexts, may not be to Toronto, it is the students that are richer than the landlords, right? And so then I'm thinking about this sort of tension between asymmetrical economic power between the richer student and then the original resident, also as a racialized and an impoverished category in the North American context. And to sort of say, how do we kind of hold on to your charge of transing and queering that liminal edge, but not lose the material differences between them, right? And I think it's interesting to then sort of hold on to that. There's a lot that got lost in gentrification, but that core question of asymmetrical material power was its power when it started. So just how do we hold those two in tension?
Yeah. Gautam, would you also?
Thanks so much. I have a question about the boundaries of the campus when I happen to know St. George's campus, and it doesn't strike me as a campus. It feels completely integrated into the city actually. And the question there is really around the number of students have increased so much compared to the original kind of site of the university that it is integrated. Toronto, the students between Toronto Metropolitan University. So when I go there, it feels like a British relic almost, and I don't see that confinement of the original campus. Whether students are richer than landlords, I still the rental price. I paid for the rental price for my kids, so it's very doubtful where the power there lies.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, there's one more hand.
My my question is for Rahul.
Sorry?
The question is for Rahul.
We're just taking questions for Chan. We'll come to Rahul. Huh? We'll come one by one. So, Chan, over to you.
So absolutely, I think this is such an important question, and it reminds me of so one of the case studies that we're looking at, and one of the reasons these are wealthier neighborhoods, like annex neighborhood that we're looking. But there's also, like you mentioned, Grange community, who've been saying so the proposed high-rise student housing, which is developed by private real estate developers, 47-story high residential housing that they were like the student housing that they were proposing, and that fell right like it's rare felt right onto the Grange community, which is like for the longest historically known as the refugees and marginalized communities and of color communities that have been with usually South Asian, not South Asian, but Asian communities who are living over there, and they've lived there for many years now. So that dimension is definitely there, and there are definitely so many even rich students, rich international students. So I think it is really interesting to draw a couple of things here. One of the things, so these asymmetries do exist, but they're so attended to that. Of course, my focus was to bring into attention this element of sexuality, which cannot be removed from the analysis. And then when thinking about the socioeconomic asymmetries itself, I think it's really interesting. One, there is often a conflation between a university's privileges with that of student privileges, and students affiliated with the university don't really share. It's such a heterogeneous community. Absolutely. So one is that. The other is, I was thinking about it, and I go back and forth in often saying that what are the student voices that are missing? And yes, like I tend to not draw a subset within the students when countering this, because like student voices period are missing from planning and campus planning initiatives. So whether straight or LGBTQ identifying, student voices need to be because of their transient nature, and student housing and their transient nature need to, so I kind of say student housing but and students, but within that, to draw this important distinction, or it's not a hard boundary, but yet to think about queer and trans students and their specific vulnerabilities, considering these various housing crises and the cis heteropatriarchy of the ways in which town and gown conflict kind of happens is really important. So, of course, my doctoral dissertation kind of engages and attends to these stories and spatial stories of queer and trans students in specific. And I think they have important stories. Than any students, specifically because straight students and their colleagues or friends who are straight students would go on to on these what is known as straight time pathway and stop being a student, and then you have these different mechanisms to get into like your own home. And then there are queer and trans students, for instance, who may not, even if they have the option, and they do not in different urban contexts, but even if they have the option, do not want to opt for a marital family life or something. So then it kind of, they become the blur. The transience of queer and trans students go beyond their term time or course time kind of thing.
So thanks, Jan. But I'm gonna like just fascinating, but we're gonna keep moving on because now we're running a little bit out of time. But I want to kind of get to all the speakers. So Rahul, I'm gonna come to you. So first, one question from my side, and then I'll open up the floor. So I wanted to actually just ask you a little bit more. You said that hawkers are becoming easy targets, and I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the momentum of the pushback and what are some of the positionalities of those pushbacks, which makes hawkers particularly an easy target. And in that sort of a more sort of looking at it much more as sort of this this cause and response kind, this is a dialectical kind of a back and forth. What does that tell you about how Shillong, what narratives are emerging about how Shillong is recognizing itself as it moves from sort of a hill town to hill city? So I wanted to hear a little bit more about that. You had one more question at the back of the room, and I will come to you as well. So
It's pretty much related to what ma'am has already asked, but I would just want to also know, it's been always the Khasi community who has emerged as a signifier of Shillong. So are they the uh, people vouching Shillong to be the pioneer gentrifying city, and are they the one who are actually getting benefited, or how does that interaction, as ma'am asked, goes to back to the hawkers?
thanks.
Thank you so much. It was a fascinating presentation, Rahul. I have a quick question about the state and law and whether that is, and whether because your framing was about urban commoning and right to the city and so on. The pushback or the activism that you describe was very legally based, right? You even said they went there holding the law in their hand. But of course, the right to the city exceeds any sort of legal framework. So I'm wondering, is there any discussion amongst the activists about what they might want to do beyond just appealing to the law? Are there any other ways that they're making claims to the city that exceed the law? Because we know that, of course, laws can be changed as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Just one very quick one, Rahul, and thanks for that. I just want to know if hawker was a relevant self-identification, or does it emerge as a political subjectivity because the law happens, right? So when do people start calling themselves not Shillong residents, Khasis, not ethnic, non-sector, because suddenly become hawker as this particular political subjectivity of claimsmen?
Just keep it going. Rahul, over to you.
Okay. Thank you for all the four questions. Firstly, I mean, if we were to think in terms of pushback, I think it's interesting to look at the different narratives of placemaking which have emerged, both organically and then again from the state. Now, in recent years, there has been a move to capitalize on Shillong's living musical heritage and culture and to reframe it as the rock capital of India. And what's interesting is how the tourism department, one of the stakeholders, they've also taken to this. And different agencies have started talking about official versions of placemaking where they say we should start having roadside performances Uh, in fact, in one state agency's website, it goes on to say that in America, a lot of music in the 60s and 70s emerged out of street side performances, and there should be no reason why we don't have the same in Shillong. And so, if you were to take that as a starting point, it starts giving you a glimpse of how the state would like to reimagine the city away from its messy everyday realities in terms of placemaking, right? Secondly, with regards to the second question, if we were to look at the communal or sectarian angle to the entire hawkers issue, it's interesting because when I spoke to some activists on the ground, they said that, see, if we had not gotten involved, then this entire issue would have taken on a communal color, because what would have happened is that certain pressure groups would have gotten involved, and you would have had a selective a selective politics where certain hawkers are allowed to stay and others are pressured to move. Not to say that that has not existed even now, but the at least the union and told they've been quite categorical in saying that they have zero tolerance, and they've said this publicly, that they have zero tolerance for anyone trying to bring forth such divisions. Now, whether or not that is actually the case in every single case or every single hawker is something that requires further investigation. But from my limited interviews, it does seem like this has been a largely non-sectarian move, even though they have had pressures and continue and will continue to do so. Thirdly, it's interesting when we look at, and this also struck me when we look at the negotiations with the central law. When the members of TUR generally write in the Shillong Times editorials, the largest English daily in the city, they were initially defending their position vis-a-vis the hawkers and the hawkers movement by saying that we are not anarchists, we are working completely within the purview of the law, so we are actually law-abiding citizens. Now, that sort of engagement with the law is interesting, but at the same time, what we see is people engaging with the law when it is perhaps beneficial to them, and in other cases, working with more informal strategies, such as uh, occupation of the streets, when it is again beneficial to them. So you have both strategies at work here, both abiding the law and at times working in gray zones around the law in terms of protest, right? And this, even though it doesn't adhere to classic notions of commoning, I think to some extent we can think of what Harvey said in terms of the need to scale up urban commoning strategies by having alliances with the state when it is beneficial to such movements. Finally, I think in terms of the last question, I seem to have forgotten exactly the
Whether they self-identify as hawkers, or did that?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting question, because the entire idea of self-identifying as hawkers, I don't know if it really existed before the entire issue became politicized. And again, is it a question of who uses this term more? Is it us as the middle classes and the ones who are scholarizing and theorizing about it, or is it also the hawkers? But once this politicization has taken place, what we do see on the ground is that yes, a lot of these hawkers do identify as such only because they are now party to the court case, only because they understand that they are invested in this process as well. So I hope that covers
Yes.
the last question as well.
Thank you so much, Rahul. Again, I'm going to move quickly on to Balbir, starting off a question from my side and open up the floor. So, Balbir, I just wanted to kind of hear a little bit more about, I mean, you kind of hinted at it. There's this whole sort of nexus of political and social patronage, some of it coming from religion, some of it coming from electoral politics, which is also very actively shaping what modern Mumbai is, contemporary Mumbai is. So I just, and in some ways there's a sort of a stark contrast between these narratives, which are probably not as well heard of, especially in academic and research context, and there's much more of the real estate and the capitalist kind of framings that we hear. I want to hear a little bit more in terms of, through your research, what are these alternative narratives about city making which are anchored in sort of these very active social and political patronage networks that you have been seeing as a part of your research. That's from my side. I also want to see if there are any questions from the floor. Okay, so Balbir, if you want to start off.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for the question. So what we find particularly with regards to um, and so this is true for football to some extent, and I mean more prominently seen in kabaddi. What we see, and this is something that I've established through my narrative. So and also more, I mean, descriptive quantitative data, which I can share. So what happens is largely that with these particular migrants, right, like coming from the Konkan region to begin with, right, and a large part of this population is still by the 1940s and by the 1930s are still from Konkan. Like so, while diversification is still happening as to like what the population composition is, so like still very Marathi speaking crowd and also very particular Marathi speaking crowd, right? So Pune attracts a very different kind of migration pattern based on its own experience of industrialization, right? Like in terms of I mean what it can do, but like what we see in Mumbai therefore is a very particular kind of migration from a set of, I mean, geography. Subsequently, as migration improves, what happens, you find kabaddi sort of shaping up to be a very good crowd puller, right? Like, so because it has always been this rural sport, and because you had a very steady stream of migration from a particular region into the city, right? And into a part of the city that has continued to be that part. So it's not like, okay, there's like a wide scale of displacement happening or gentrification happening in the first half of the 20th century, right? So you still had a lot of continuity with migration going on. So that kind of provided a very good bed, right, for the game to like move into every now and then, despite mills working with the strikes and everything. So what happened was like a large part of the financing, correct? Like like it was away from the political arena in the sense that like the large part of financing would come from the gangs that would exist, like the neighborhood gangs, local areas, like, and the narratives are filled with that. So a lot of these clubs would, and like there was a sense of nationalism, correct, like attached to the Hindu body. So a large part of the kabaddi that we see today in urban spaces come from the notion of shakhas, like the RSS shakha, for example. So that essentially stems from the idea that how RSS was, and also people with particular sense of nationalism in the pre-independence period were able to kind of organize themselves in these urban pockets, subsequently support clubs, and then move forward with this idea of a ideal Hindu body, correct, in the urban space. Also, obviously, it had like notions of language, which, I mean, vernacular schools promoted, for example, or even private vernacular medium schools as well as public private schools.
Right.
I mean, public schools, for example, the municipal schools. Subsequently, what we see very interestingly is when regular elections became a feature of Indian society, because these are naturally very successful crowd pullers, correct? Like I would have regularly people point out to me, okay, why didn't you take up cricket? And kabaddi people would tell me, oh, like you look at Ranji Trophy, for example, like the biggest game in the Ranji Trophy would attract, I mean, 10% of the crowd that a national level kabaddi club tournament would hold. So you have like all these narratives about large crowd pulling ability of the sport just because you had this steady stream of
Yeah.
migration and this space set
Yeah.
up for them, right?
No,
Sustained through mandals and all of that.
yeah. No,
And
that's
yeah,
fascinating. Thank you so
yeah,
much. That's
yeah.
that's this thing. Just in interest of time, I'm going to keep moving on, Balbir. We have about we should close in 10 minutes, so we have some break before the next panel. So about 5 minutes each to Abhiruchi, Rashi, and Ruchika. Abhiruchi, one quick question from my side as we sort of open up the floor. My question is more sort of, I'm curious to know that, your research topic, like what kind of also is drawing you in as a researcher into this kind of a space. I mean, there is definitely the sense of that here are these women who are disrupting social expectations, of their context, and which is translating into very real estate, dreams and aspirations located in Mumbai, in that whole transition is happening. Just want to push a little bit more that beyond sort of an individualized aspirational trajectories, are there also communities and socialities that are emerging around these transitions, which allow us to sort of see these moments beyond these individuals, but also sort of what does this say about women from small towns and what they can and cannot do and how they're seen and what their lives can be and what transitions are possible. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more on sort of what's this lens opening up for us as a research space. Are there any other questions that I can take from the floor? Ian.
It's a very good question about, I guess, like urban landscape, if you like. Because I started to follow influencers in the city where I research, which is a smaller city, and they often appear just because out of interest, not out of research, well, out of research interest, and they appear in well-known locations around the city. And because you're also exploring, I guess, urban change and how these ladies interact with the city, do they also appear outside in places, or is it very much like showing their homes and these sort of aesthetics as well?
Thank you for those questions. Beginning with the question about are there larger processes of change that are happening as a result or because of the content of these influencers? Now, that's actually a very important question because I think one point I would like to make about is brand endorsements, which is, I think, a very real and very mainstream commercial kind of interaction. Uh, and also influences sort of demand and supply networks. So Manisha Rani, for example, she has the most followings, and she's also a very popular face on television because of her winning some reality television shows. So firstly, there is an interconnectivity between the world of advertising, social media, television content, um, in the sense of the networks of consumption. So I think they're interlinked in terms of networks of consumption. That's A. B. Um, these because these are figures of transition, like these are influencers who are guiding transition for other people like them. So for example, Manisha Rani has endorsed this app called Duolingo, where within a video where she is doing a vlog about her own personal transition, the brand is placed within that video where she is talking to an actor who she's calling her friend, and she says that how can you just spend 10 minutes in your day to learn English and sort of make yourself more useful. So that is just one of the examples where I saw. Similarly, Koman Pandey does a lot with this brand called the Beauty Co, where she is also doing a day in my life video but she is positioning that as the brand she uses to do her skin care routine. So that is just a part of her day in her life video. But she's also kind of showing how college going girls or girls of her generation can actually like make themselves look a certain way. So her videos are also about kind of influencing consumer behavior, I feel. So I think actually I don't see that these are only stories of individual transitions. I think these are I take influencers a little seriously in terms of the in terms of the I think how they influence consumer behavior. So I think they do in terms of not just consumer behavior but branding. What is what should be the desirable behavior by somebody who is coming from lesser means, and who is a woman, how should they look, how should they behave? And if they don't know English, so that you don't need to know English, then what should you know? You can know certain phrases, you can know certain styles. So they are actually affecting how people consume things, and also are portraying themselves and the choices they make even about their own careers. So I do think
Yeah.
I think they are making a lot of change around them. And the second question about I'm sorry, I think I kind of the
Yeah.
the
Abhiruchi, maybe we can take it offline. Just in the interest of time, we are running quite late now. So, Rashi and Ruchika, and again, like, because I mean, I want to put this out as then they could be comments, they're not necessarily questions. And I have two actually. One, you said that, there is, you're also working with, say, Navnirman Manch. And so, which already has a certain sort of a very embedded knowledge of having doing this for a while, right? So, one is a question on what are the kind of challenges in content creation that you kind of come across, like in terms of like, with some of the content coming from university spaces and then some of it coming from ongoing struggles, just to kind of understand the sort of the everydayness of putting that content together, because co-production at the end of the day is a lovely word, but in some ways it also sort of doesn't give us as much insight into the politics of that co-production. So I wanted to kind of just understand that a little bit more. The second is actually kind of flipping the question in terms of how you framed it as well, and saying that it's one is to take it very seriously that the university needs to create these kinds of co-production of knowledge very seriously, but to flip that and to say, what are these spaces then teaching the university to deal with the kinds of challenges of differential capacities, about actionable research and practice, and this question of leadership, which in general, as we are sort of sitting in this moment where systems are falling apart, larger systems, smaller systems, etc., that's becoming, I think, a very, very important thing for that the universities may or may not actually have a fully developed language around about what this leadership looks like within this kind of a political moment. So that's from my side. Are there other questions from the floor? Okay, so over to you. Simon, yeah, sure, very quickly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have the same question that you have the challenges, but like, thanks for asking, Sudi. Ruchika and Rashi, both of you, you are covering like 4 different cities, like from uh, Ranchi in Jharkhand comes from a different backward region to Indore, which is much more centered to Delhi, which is hardcore metropolitan. It's a metro city, coming down to Bangalore, which has again like complete regional change. Because you are analyzing, both of you right now, like taking that last 5-6 years data and all, how different are those queries, the questions and like understandings and all, from different scales of the cities to different geographies and like regions and like multiple things. I'm just trying to understand like what is your feedback that you got, and like the understanding of all these 4 scales of the cities. Yeah.
Thanks for the questions. Rashi, do you want me to have a go, and then do you want to come in? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, I'll start with Sai's question, which is on the different, just thinking about different cities, and I'll maybe walk through the example of Indore and Delhi, since that's been the most recent and longer engagement. I think there are a lot of commonalities in terms of inequalities, but how the issues that we are working on are primarily the housing rights issues, and so the difference of Delhi as a city state, and the kind of governmental agencies, or the kind of the politics of land, that's different. And if you think of Madhya Pradesh, we're thinking of a state which has particular acts, policies that are employable, usable for the cohort. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is also, if you think of Delhi as the city that it is, and if we reflect a bit upon our cohort, we had folks coming from different organizations. There's different sort of sensibility and that comes from living in a city like Delhi, having different kinds of access to resources. So while IHS has an office in Delhi, we also have different sorts of Delhi is a different scale of a city and allows for different sort of exposure to participants. Whereas in Madhya Pradesh, the cohort has different sorts of exposures in addition to Madhya Pradesh's Navnirman Manch. So there's also differences in terms of if we look at the kind of skills we are looking to sort of build or support, they sort of differ a bit. So that also changes the curriculum and how we move. And how we moved through. And I think that that's something that we've been reflecting on, how it needs to be a bit flexible according to the city, but also the needs of, the cohort. Challenges and Rashi, do you want to come in on this question, or should we just...
I think I'd just like to
Yeah.
add and say that in Delhi, the focus on creating solidarity within the group, because they came from different organizations, was much more. The focus was there much more. Over here in Indore, they're already in a network, so they know each other and meet each other more regularly. So that was one difference as well in when we were thinking through what the challenges would be in terms of, this kind of building solidarity within the network.
Do you want to take one and then I follow? Or I can just go straight and then you can follow. So in terms of challenges in content creation, I think there were a lot of things to think through because we come in from IHS, which is very much a research, teaching, academic space. So how do you really make theory useful? I think sometimes, research language can sort of be a little, you're speaking to yourselves. And so how do you sort of think about theory that is actually actionable? I think for me, that's been a really big learning from this. The role of language and, I'm not the most best Hindi speaker, but it's something that I've had to learn as I've been part of this. And I think I feel very grateful to learn from so many people, and so the and just challenges in terms of capacities also to really support the kind of language needs and the translations. I think there needs to be a lot more resources that we have that goes into translations, archiving, accessibility of useful material in diverse languages, and media like videos and that can really help. I'm not sure I'm answering the exact question though.
Yeah.
Rashi, do you want to come in here?
I think that the other challenge was, one was language. The other is that age. The cohort goes from 18 all the way till 55. There are differential capacities within the cohort themselves. So, the more younger ones might be very familiar with social media and there they can, take a lead. But the people who are much older and are set in like really social movements, particularly in Indore, in Madhya Pradesh, lots of people from the Narmada Bachao Andolan, the importance of songs there, so suddenly in a social media training class, there were songs that came from Narmada Bachao Andolan, and the older participants bringing that in. So to hold that kind of classroom and create a curriculum that will flow across, and the learning needs being different, but the outcomes, we want them to be as close as possible. So that's definitely like a challenge.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that so age, language, again, between Indore, Bhopal, Sagar being a tier 3, tier 4 almost city, so there again, what is the challenge in housing? Maybe it is not an immediate eviction as compared to say Bhopal or Indore, but how do you then hold that in the space of a large state like Madhya Pradesh, versus Delhi, which is more, city state. Again, opportunities, like Ruchika said, much more for people to go in and learn different kinds of things in different networks. Being
Great.
being a as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. That gives us a lot to think about. Thank you, everyone.